It has been 6 years since the last entry in Forza Motorsport on PC and Xbox, and since then, a lot has changed. For the game, there's a new renderer, new dynamic weather and simulation, and much more. But it's not only the game that has changed, expectations have changed in the recent years as well, especially on PC, where the sim racing genre has been rapidly evolving the last few years, with series such as F1 setting new heights for visual excellence with ray tracing in the PC version. But there are also less than positive expectations as well in the AAA gaming landscape on PC. 2022 and 2023 saw some of the most disastrous releases for AAA games on PC, with too many AAA games shipping with poor user experiences and bad intrusive stuttering. So how does Forza Motorsport in 2023 hold up to expectations? Does it stutter? How does the PC version compare to the Xbox Series X version? And how can you get an optimized experience on PC? I will cover all that and more in this PC-focused video for Forza Motorsport. But before I get into the comparisons and optimized settings, let us start by talking about the things I always talk about first, and that is user experience and the options menu. There's both not so good and good things here. As Forza Motorsport boots for the first time, you'll be greeted by a good shader compilation step after the initial intro videos and Xbox Live sign-ins. On my 12900K, it took roughly 20 seconds before it was done, and I was making my way into the game's main menu. That may seem like it's too short of a time to be effective based on the experience in other titles, but thankfully it is not. Based on all my play so far of Forza Motorsport on PC, I do not believe I saw any singular instance of shader compilation-induced stutter. None. This is a great sigh of relief here from me. For sure, we should expect this of any title on PC, as shader compilation stutter is inexcusable, but given the state of AAA releases on PC, even basic quality is never a guarantee. So, bravo turn 10. The smoothness, though, in general, otherwise, beyond shader compilation, is very dependent on your CPU configuration and your settings. Now, this is where things get a bit messy for the user experience in Forza Motorsport. Not every CPU out there will manage a good 60 FPS in this game, especially if the game's maxed out. A Ryzen 5 3600, for example, when running a race at ultra settings with full cars on the circuit trying to hit 60 FPS consistently, well, it will fail pretty hard. Here, the game dips into the 50s or even the 40s at times as the track is traversed. The reason for the dips are various, I would say. For one, all the AI cars on the track will increase CPU load. An empty track would definitely run better than this. But still, the game is CPU limited below 60 FPS on the CPU, even with nothing on the track, as each track in the game seems to have invisible lines drawn through it where loading may perhaps occur. And frame times when you traverse these lines will increase for a split second. This is indeed worrying, as rapid increases in frame times tend to mean stuttering. I do not want to use the word traversal stutter here, as it's not as intense as I've seen in other games, but if you play the game with an unlocked frame rate with VSync off, by forcing it off in your driver control panel, you can see what I mean. Here on that same Ryzen 5 3600 with an unlocked frame rate with VSync off, you will see a periodic dipping on the frame time graph as the car moves through the world at ultra settings with no cars on the track. So to avoid these periodic dips in the frame time graph impacting the smoothness of the game, you will have to have a higher end CPU at higher settings like these. Further complicating the smoothness in this game is the fact that certain things in the game just run heavy on the CPU. Replays, for example. On left here is my replay of a race I did on Maple Valley, and the right is the live recording of that race with me playing. Both of these recordings are CPU bound, and as you can see, when CPU limited at least, the replays run around 30% slower than the real gameplay. I'm not sure why that is the case, but it is the way it is. So getting a flawless 60 FPS outside of races is a bit complex in this game. Another complication to getting a smooth 60 FPS in Forza comes down to how it scales on CPUs. When running the game unlocked, using a replay and CPU limiting on a Core i9 12900K, we can see that the game has very flat, and I'm going to say honestly poor CPU thread and core scaling. With more than 6 threads, the game kind of starts losing performance. 6 cores on the 12900K actually runs a little bit faster than 8 cores in my testing, and hyper-threading on 8 cores runs noticeably slower than hyper-threading off. So modern wide CPUs, like how most modern high-end CPUs are, we'll see intense underutilization in a title like Forza Motorsport. This essentially means that the game is surprisingly single-thread limited here on PC in the year 2023. So getting a really great smooth experience across Forza Motorsport is a challenge at its max settings. And the first and most important factor will be your single-core performance in this game. So if you have an older CPU, you may be out of luck. The second most important thing for smoothness is going to be your settings. The game's performance menu does offer powerful scaling for CPU and GPU performance. When CPU limited, the differences between low and max settings is vast. The game has 74% higher performance on low settings when CPU limited on a Ryzen 5 3600 versus ultra settings in this replay here. This level of CPU performance scaling with the game settings is large, and this is definitely not common to see in most games out there. So settings are a powerful tool to help you get better performance and make your lower or older mid-range CPUs actually have a chance at smoothness in this game. But what about those settings? Are they well designed? This is an area where I have had a mixed experience in Forza on PC. It has a lot going for it nominally at its face value here in the settings menu. You have things like DLSS, FSR2, an in-game temporal upscaler if you adjust the internal resolution percentage. You have a benchmark with an after-action report, and technically you can change settings in real time to understand their visual and performance ramifications. There's also an auto-dynamic optimization system apparently, which adjusts settings and resolutions based upon performance targets and PC hardware according to the description. On paper, this all sounds great, but in practice, it's not always the case. For example, changing those settings in real time. You can do it, but I would advise most players to do full game restarts after changing settings. For one, sometimes changing a setting can have a knock-on visual bug. Like here, all I did was change DLAA to TAA for a test, and ray tracing stopped working after I changed to TAA. Another issue can be found on GPUs with more limited VRAM pools, so like from 8 to 12 gigabytes, for example. On such a GPU, sometimes changing an innocuous looking setting can overcommit the video memory in an improper manner. It would make the game slow down to a crawl after a settings change, as we can see here, as the game appears to be dipping into system memory in a very inefficient way. This is all cleared up though with a game restart, and the game will run perfectly fine and have no video memory issues at all. It was just that changing the settings was making the game run a lot slower than it really should. Another issue is understanding how the settings work. I think the descriptions in general are great, and the VRAM meter is nice, but certain settings required some hardcore testing on my part to figure out what is actually going on, and I'm still not exactly sure. The dynamic optimization stuff, for example, is just not intuitive at all, and I'm still not exactly sure if I'm understanding completely what is happening when I'm touching these settings. As far as I can tell, setting the resolution to auto does not actually change internal resolution in real time like a dynamic resolution system that you might find in a game like Titanfall 2 or Gears of War on PC. What this does, in my experience, is actually change your output resolution when it is set to auto. And it bases your output resolution on your setting for the dynamic render quality level. So if that setting, dynamic render quality, is set to ultra, then the game will output at 4K. If at high, the game will output at 1440p. And when it's set to medium or low, it seems to output at 1080p. So that option seems to mainly just adjust the output resolution of the game, which is pretty odd if you ask me. The next thing that I had trouble understanding is, what do these auto settings actually do? Does it mean it automatically changes the setting while you're playing the game? As far as I can tell, it doesn't do that. What it does do is it varies each setting that is set to auto based on your chosen dynamic render quality again. So if you had dynamic render quality set to high, then all the settings labeled auto would run at high. At least that's what my testing seems to show. It doesn't seem to vary the settings in real time. That is a bit confusing, I would say. Another thing that is confusing is the performance target option. The first thing you need to know is that Forza Motorsport is always V-synced. No matter what your setting is set to for this option, the screen is always going to be composited to your resolution and refresh rate of your desktop with no tearing. Are you on a 1440p 144Hz screen? Well, then the game is always V-synced to 1440p at 144Hz, even if you set the game's output resolution to be lower. What it does do in such a moment is that it bilinear upscales up to your desktop resolution. When it does do that, it unfortunately leaves a tiny black bar around the edges of your screen. That's not too good, so in my opinion, You should change your desktop resolution if you also want to change your in-game resolution. Okay, the second other confusing thing about this performance target option is that it can make your game stutter fiercely if you misconfigure it. If you have it set to uncapped, for example, which I think a lot of players would do, but you're also on a V-synced panel, which you definitely will be in this game since it's automatically V-sync, then the game will actually have very obvious camera and perhaps simulation stutter. Here is the game on the left with the frame rate set to unlocked on a 60 Hz display versus it set to V-sync 60 FPS cap in parentheses there. The video on the left with it set to uncapped unlocked shows big jerks in camera motion as the car moves forward or as the camera is panning left to right, while the video on the right doesn't show this at all. It's running flawlessly. What's happening on the left isn't a performance issue though. It's actually running at a flawless 60 FPS and both are V-synced. It's just that the setting for performance target is set to uncapped, which causes camera stuttering. As far as I can tell in my testing, you should really only use the options that have the word V-sync next to them if you do not want to get camera stuttering. Another thing to know about this performance target setting is what the auto setting does. It does something differently here than the other auto settings. When set to auto, it will make it so that the game limits your FPS based on the context, exactly like it does on Xbox Series X. So if it is set to auto, it will keep cutscenes, replays, and the game menus to 30 FPS, but racing will be at 60. So if you are having trouble hitting 60 out of races, this auto option might be the option for you. But once again, beware of the dynamic optimization setting. If that is set to low while the performance target is set to auto, then the game will lock to 30 FPS regardless of context. Whew. Okay, so as you can tell, the options menu is a little bit confusing and not exactly intuitive, and I think that is a shame. I also think it is a shame that the game does not appear to have real dynamic resolution on PC. Now, perhaps I'm misunderstanding everything here. Perhaps it is actually there, but I could not find evidence of it happening when using any of the auto settings in this game. It does dynamically vary resolution on Xbox Series X, so it not being here in an intuitive or perhaps working way on PC seems like a misstep to me. But beyond all those issues I just listed, I would still say that there's some powerful performance scaling in these options, which is great, and they're very helpful. And the benchmark is really well made, and it does exactly what I want it to do. The thing you have to watch out though for is that you restart the game between settings changes to ensure that there is not a bug occurring in your visuals or performance. As a contrast to some of the issues I just mentioned though, I actually do find the menus themselves great to navigate and the loading to be relatively quick. Now, it's not the fastest loading game I've played on a PC before, but getting into races is not an issue on PC. When putting a high-spec PC next to the Xbox Series X version loading the same race, it is possible to see how they both load at nearly the exact same time. Though you will notice that Xbox Series X loads tracks narrowly faster than even a really high-spec PC. A bit surprising given the spec difference here, but if I were to guess, I would say that there's some extra shader pre-compilation occurring when you load new content on PC. But that's just track loading. One area where PC is a great deal snappier with the right hardware is the little loads that occur before a race begins. On Xbox Series X, the camera angle change that it happens there to show this new scene will sometimes take around 1.5 seconds to complete. On this high-spec PC I'm comparing against, it took only half a second. So this aspect of user experience can be a great deal faster on PC and will indeed give a more seamless feel to the gameplay experience over Xbox Series X. Before I get into Xbox Series X settings and optimized settings after that, I want to talk briefly about the image quality options on PC. At native, you have access to basic TAA or DLAA on NVIDIA GPUs. Yes, no more MSAA, even though the series has supported in the past, and it's supported in Forza Horizon's latest entry. Now to me, I don't care at all, as I don't like MSAA's sub-pixel issues and extra aliasing, but there's a number of people in the audience who do want MSAA in this game, and it would be a nice alternative to those who do not like any form of TAA. Although, as we can see with DLAA, it is a much better solution than the default TAA found in the game. Check out the slowed down footage side by side compared here, concentrating on the side of the track. Notice how the fence obscuring the crowd causes flickering and aliasing as the camera tracks by it with TAA on the left. This issue is gone with DLAA mostly, and the visuals look much more stable there. Another difference between DLAA and the default TAA is there's less blur and smearing. If I pause the game while I round a corner here between the two, you can really see what I mean. Both of the shots have no motion blur on, but notice how the TAA version looks a whole much more blurred in comparison to DLAA. So DLAA is definitely a superior anti-aliasing technique in this game. If you want to use image reconstruction, the game has 3 options, but they are locked out depending upon your GPU. If you have an RTX GPU, you get access to DLSS and of course the in-game TAAU scaler. If you plug in an AMD GPU or other type of GPU, you get access to FSR2 and TAAU. So you won't be able to find FSR2 in the menu if you have an RTX GPU. Of the 3 reconstruction techniques, the fast-paced nature of Forza, I would say, really puts DLSS on a much higher rung position than we've perhaps seen in other titles. The biggest difference tends to be how stable the image is and how much potential ghosting can occur. And you usually see the biggest differences on the cars ahead of you on the track. Just take a look at the difference in aliasing in this shot here with how the cars have much better proper anti-aliased silhouettes with DLSS, whereas the other techniques tend to fail rather badly. Another difference is the potential for ghosting. As you can see in this sequence here, take a look at the stability of the cars and also the traffic cones while they're being tossed around. Yeah, I'd say there are some very large differences between the scalers here, with DLSS looking a lot more visibly stable. On a whole, it just means that DLSS has better image quality in this game than the alternatives available. But I think if you're on AMD or Intel or an older NVIDIA GPU, then FSR2 in quality mode would be the best thing to use if you can, and avoid the in-game scaler if possible. I must say I really would have also liked to have seen XeSS here. Okay, with image quality out of the way, let me get into all those Xbox Series X settings and how I specifically looked into the settings for Performance RT mode, which Oliver says is the best way to play the game on Xbox, and I find that mode the most interesting for PC comparison, as it will indeed give us a great insight into those settings on PC that we can use for optimized settings, as developers making settings for consoles often align really well with those settings I would use for optimized settings. Now let us start with the headline features, and that would be ray traced reflections. Here the ray traced reflections on Xbox's Performance RT mode do not feature the trackside reflections, also known as full reflections in the PC version. That's visible here versus the PC version maxed out, where we cannot see the reflections in these windows here trackside. These trackside reflections can offer a very large difference when they are set to that full setting, as we can see on the far right here, giving much more complete reflections of the surroundings on the road. As to how they work, as far as I can tell, almost nearly all track reflections from the full reflections option are just done with a more extensive version of screen space reflections. Check out this shot here in photo mode with me just being behind my car. Take notice how nearly all of the road reflections on the surface of the road, including the reflections of the car, just disappear out of screen space, even though the camera is incredibly close to the main player car here. So the PC version does have extremely limited RT reflection range, exactly like the Xbox Series X version of the game, which I think is a shame. And you can see this reflected in the settings for PC RT, which are bare bones. All RT is controlled monolithically with one option that turns on RTAO and RT reflections, yet RTAO also has a quality slider for its internal resolution. When going between the different various RT presets, we can also see how that monolithic nature works. On the far right, we can see that full reflections plus RTAO has reflections on the ground there from the rain-slicked grass. Those are not seen on any lower settings. When we go from car reflections plus RTAO to just car reflections, we can see that any reflections from objects on the track disappear in the car's reflection. The barrier is no longer reflected there. With the car reflections option, the car only reflects itself and nothing else. And obviously turning off RT completely just has SAO and standard reflection techniques. In another shot here, we can see what RTAO does for the image with these presets. Look at the background trees, rocks, and more. We can see how much more grounded they look with RTAO on in the third and fourth rightmost shots. Based on shots like this one, I would say RTAO is actually a much more important visual feature than the current kind of weak RT reflections that the game has. As mentioned earlier, there is a separate option which controls the amount of rays traced for RTAO, and as we can see here, RTAO will become less stable and flickery the lower the setting is. it'll have a bit of pixel crawl there on low that is just not there on ultra. So you can control RTAO resolution while you cannot control RT reflection resolution, and this is important as when you compare to Xbox Series X, it's pretty easy to see how much higher resolution the reflections are on PC. A lot higher res. The only way to actually reduce resolution of reflections on PC is by reducing internal resolution. And as we can see there, when doing that, the Xbox Series X's internal resolution for its RT reflections is lower than 1080p actually on PC. So I would say Xbox uses a setting not possible on PC in terms of reflection resolution, even if it does use the CARS plus RTAO option for feature set. The quality of RTAO on Xbox Series X appears to be the low setting on PC based upon the amount of pixel crawl seen versus the PC version at a similar internal resolution. Beyond RT, the most visible difference on PC is the very limited anisotropic filtering on Xbox Series X. When comparing the two, it's obviously set at the 2x level on Xbox Series X, which leaves the road ahead of the car and almost anything ahead of the car looking really rather soupy. As for other texture resolution, the Xbox Series X is using the medium texture setting for trackside detail, as we can see by this barrier here, which is a good deal lower res than the highest setting on PC. The ground track textures on Xbox Series X are also generally a lot lower resolution than those I could find on PC. It almost looks like there's 4 times the texel density there in the PC version, regardless of my settings. I'm not sure for the reason for this exactly. I know PC does install an 18GB high-resolution texture pack for the track, but I also think that texture pack is installed on Xbox, even though it's like 30 gigs there. Either way, the game's textures on track are much higher quality on PC with all settings and the pack installed. The other most obvious difference between PC Max and Series X would be in the cube map quality. On Xbox, as you move forward, you can see how the reflections update every other frame, and this correlates with the medium and low settings on PC. The high setting instead updates every 2 out of every 3 frames, so 2/3 of the time instead of half the time, like medium and low, and the ultra setting updates the cube maps with every frame that is rendered, so it looks a lot smoother than every other setting. Between medium and low, I'm having trouble seeing whatever the difference is. But if we look up close at cube map reflections in like-for-like scenarios, we can see that the RT performance mode on Xbox Series X definitely has less static objects in its cube maps in that mode than even the PC lowest setting. So I would say Xbox Series X here is closest to the low setting, but in some ways it is actually lower. For shadows, the Xbox version uses a setting in between PC's high and ultra settings, at least on this track here, where we can see the resolution and the amount of edges in the trackside shadows are in between that high and ultra setting. Another noticeable difference to the PC version is in the motion blur quality on Xbox Series X. Xbox Series X on close inspection uses the low quality as found on PC, which shows more obvious individual samples in the motion blur itself. When driving though around at full speed, the difference just tends to mean that the motion blur on Xbox or on PC's low setting just looks a bit more smeared, and it can give the camera motion blur a more exaggerated look. Another more obvious setting, depending upon your camera view, is the mirror quality setting. This one seems to be PC's medium setting. We can see this in this shot here, where the lack of bystanders in the reflection lines up with medium or low on PC. I can tell it's medium and not low though, as the low quality mirrors on Forza's PC version update every other frame. That is not the case on Xbox Series X in Performance RT mode or on PC's medium setting. Beyond these settings differences, I would say the rest are less visible. Windshield reflections, for example, on Xbox Series X appear to be the high setting as found on PC, but you can only really tell the difference if you stop and take a very magnified look. Another less visible setting is car LOD. When you place a shot on Xbox next to the PC presets, we can see it's closest to PC's high. For example, here where the top of the car is not as deformed on Xbox as it is on PC's low and medium, so it's at least high. But when we look over at this car here, we can see Xbox is missing detail found there on Ultra. So it is definitely PC's high, or at least closest to it. 2 settings I really couldn't find good evidence for on Xbox, and that is livery quality and rain quality. With rain quality, for example, low to ultra looked really similar to my eye, and I'm not sure exactly what it was changing, visually at least. Still, even with my not being able to get those settings for Xbox, I think we have a good lock on the settings here, at least those that are meaningful. And even though we cannot turn down some of the settings as low as we can do on Xbox, like the reflection quality or the cube maps, we do have a good basis for some PC optimized settings here actually. If I use these Xbox closest settings on an RTX 2070 Super at 1440p in DLSS balance mode, we can see that these settings improve the performance over the game's Ultra settings by an impressive 63% when fully GPU limited. That's quite awesome to see indeed. But as I said, these are just the basis for PC GPU optimization that I'm going to use. I'm going to further improve on them in those areas where we can do that on PC without a great performance cost. Take anisotropic filtering, for example. In comparison to the base 2x AF that Xbox uses, an RTX 2070 Super sees only a 1% performance loss or so when going up to 16 times AF. This is a huge improvement to image quality over Xbox and totally worth it for optimized settings. Same with the overall RT setting. Turning on full reflections on PC over just car reflections costs only around 3% or so in this shot, which is rather cheap, I would say, for the improvement to the reflections, even if they are really just SSR at the end of the day. I would say this kind of a difference is worth it. Another upgrade we can add is the trackside texture quality detail. Yep, that has no real effect on frame rate at all on the RTX 2070 Super. Same with things like particle and livery quality. Yeah, I couldn't really measure GPU performance differences there using the game benchmark at least. And with those settings changed, I would say we actually have some nice optimized settings for mid-range GPUs. When you put those next to the Xbox Series X settings and Ultra settings on a mid-range GPU, we get some nice wins over the Xbox version in terms of quality, and we're still performing a lot better than Ultra. But like I said, these are just my GPU recommended settings for mid-range. I would definitely not say that these settings work really well on older mid-range CPUs. In fact, when doing the tests, we can see that they perform shockingly similar to the game's max settings. So my recommendation for those older CPUs is actually to turn off things like ray tracing completely, in spite of how much it may add to the visuals with RTAO. This will help clear up some of the mid-track traversal stutters and spikes that can occur on these older, lower-end CPUs. But beyond this, I also have separate recommended settings for higher-end GPUs. Here I would recommend turning up the cube map reflections to Ultra so as to prevent that jarring look of them running at a lower refresh rate. I would also recommend turning up RTAO quality to at least medium to prevent some of that fizzle that we can see otherwise on low. And with that, we have various optimized settings. 3 different ones, in fact. As I see it, my optimized settings have some great wins on the GPU side of things, but on the CPU side of things, I'm having a hard time recommend going lower than what I do for those CPU optimized settings, as I think the visuals start getting impacted too much if we were to go any bit lower. Okay, with optimized settings out of this way, I kind of want to get to the end of this Forza Motorsport video on PC, and I must say I have a mixed opinion of the game I've been playing. It scales a good deal higher than the Xbox Series version in ways that are visible, like image quality and more, and I like that quite a bit, but I'm also confused why it does not scale even higher. Don't forget, the game was shown off with much better RT reflections in the pre-release footage, and it even showed off RTGI, which is completely missing for launch. I'm wondering why there are not more useful quality knobs at launch for things like RT reflection resolution, distance, and of course RTGI. I can only guess why they're not here, but it is disappointing that one of the biggest visual improvements over consoles in the end ends up being anisotropic filtering. One of my guesses as to why there isn't more intense RT at launch is because the game's CPU performance at the moment, I would say, leaves a good deal to be desired. As it is right now, Forza Motorsport seems very overly reliant on single-threaded performance, especially when the track is full. This is visible just by doing those thread tests that I showed off earlier on the 12900K, and there we can see some of the flattest core scaling that I have ever measured since I started doing these type of tests. I would say it's even worse than something like Jedi Survivor. Beyond this, if you also look at utilization of the CPU while it is CPU limited on something like the Ryzen 5 3600, you can see some of that overly single thread reliance there in the utilization numbers. And I think that's punishing these older mid-range CPUs quite hard. That poor spread of utilization, I think, is making it so that older CPUs are struggling to keep their performance at high enough visual settings on track to avoid visible frame time spikes while going around a track. Yes, the game does run quite well on high-end kit, and it looks pretty good at 60 FPS as I've been showing in all this video's B-roll. But I think if I judge the game more holistically on a wider range of hardware, and if I look at its options, I would say that the scaling in the game needs to be much better, and the options need to be a little bit better as well. And with that being said, we've reached the end of this video. If you did like it, hit that like button or subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell, support us on Patreon, and as always, this is Alex bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.